Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by Old School Lane, producing various content from blogs, videos, and podcasts discussing about movies, TV shows, video games, and everything else in between since 2011. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Overcast, Breaker, Pocket Cast, and YouTube. We're associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. And welcome to a new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I am here with two very special guests talking about the special anniversary of a certain yellow sponge who pretty much just took over the world back around May of 1999. It is SpongeBob SquarePants. So I'm here with the two people behind the podcast every 11 minutes, the SpongeBob SquarePants Podcast. I'm here with Qadree, Fletcher, and Tyler Pitis. So welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm sure you guys are, gave your introductions of how you got introduced to SpongeBob over on your podcast. But for those who are not familiar with your podcast, tell us, how did you first get introduced to SpongeBob?
Well, I first started watching it as a kid, like a lot of people. It was constantly on in my house. Nickelodeon and Disney Channel, Cartoon Network, the big three kids networks, so to speak, were constantly in rotation. And so I don't remember the first time I ever saw it because I was one when it premiered, but it was probably one of the first television series I ever saw. Like I vividly remember a lot of, seeing a lot of season one as a kid. So I'm not sure if I have like very early memories of season one and season two, or if the same episodes were constantly in rotation on Nickelodeon. I'm sure it's a mixture of both, but it was one of those things that was sort of just ubiquitous in my childhood.
Yeah, same. I mean, I don't remember exactly when I started watching it. It was just always on, especially I had two older brothers. So, exposure to Nickelodeon, happened early and often. And then when we were starting the podcast, I had a nephew who was probably like 8 or 9 at the time when we first started it back in 2020, who was over all the time. So I was getting exposed to it a lot again. And so then Qadree approached me about the podcast idea, and I was all about it.
Yeah. So as for me, I was around 13 years old when the show premiered in 1999. So I was a bit too old for it when it first came out, even though that pretty much around my younger cousins and people around me who were just like really getting into it, I just thought, okay, well, I've seen something like this before where Rugrats was a huge thing at the time where everybody was into it. And I just thought, okay, well, when it comes to a lot of news shows, it becomes like really, really big. And then after a while, the popularity starts coming down. I've seen that before with Rugrats and Pokemon and various other things. But little did I know of that it was going to become the big phenomenon that it is, that everybody who anybody was going to be into it or were at least familiar with it. So I did see like a handful of episodes over the years with my younger cousins. And then after a while, I started like hearing from afar about like some of the newer episodes that were premiering after the movie. I did see the movie several times over the years. I did a podcast with my husband about the first movie and the second movie, pairing them together to see which one was the best. And then eventually we did the third movie about last year. So yeah, we have dipped our toes into SpongeBob a little bit. I mean, we still even have a bet about like which season of the Patrick Star Show is going to finally conclude. And I said season 3, he said season 2. So we're still in the second season, and so we'll just see where the bet goes. But but at the same time, I was familiar with a lot of the jokes that was featured on SpongeBob. I was familiar with a lot of the quotes and a lot of the crazy amount of memes that were popping up over the internet. And there was a lot of video games that were coming up about just as popular as any of the massive video games that were coming out on the PlayStation 2 and GameCube and Game Boy Advance. So, yeah, I mean, that just shows you about the power of what SpongeBob was. So, yeah, that's my little history of it. So, so with that out of the way, let's talk about what I usually like to talk about in TV shows on my podcast, where we talk about characters, episodes, favorite moments, etc., etc. So, I'd like to know from you guys, who's your favorite character?
My favorite character, I think, is Squidward Tentacles.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
That is not surprising to me in the slightest. Knowing Qadree back in high school, I would say that he had a lot in common with Squidward Tentacles, growing up with him. But my favorite is probably Plankton. And I don't think it's because of Plankton. It's because of all of the hilarious scenarios that happen on the show when Plankton is involved, and Mr. Lawrence's voice acting is outstanding for that particular character.
Yeah, I remember that he tried to do the same voice when he was doing the audition for SpongeBob, and it's like making Plankton sound like SpongeBob or SpongeBob sounding like Plankton was kind of like a little bit off, but it did sound funny enough to kind of like put it into a villain, especially since I was familiar with Mr. Lawrence already when he did Filbert in Rocko's Modern Life. So hearing as this like nauseating Woody Allen-esque character to going over to a villain was actually pretty stark and awesome. So that was actually pretty cool. Yeah. It's kind of hard to say about like what who's my favorite character, because there's a lot of them that I do really enjoy. I really enjoy Sandy because of her independence, her intelligence, and her love of karate. But I also enjoy at times SpongeBob's enthusiasm, especially since we are in a very depressing and cynical world. I think we all need a little bit of SpongeBob in us. So I would say that Sandy would probably be my favorite character out of the bunch. And not, I do enjoy all the other ones like Patrick or Squidward or Plankton, but I would say Sandy's my favorite. So yeah, I know this is probably going to be really difficult because I mean there have been hundreds upon hundreds of episodes, but what have been your favorites?
Oh gosh, that is such a difficult question. I
Yeah.
think I'll say this. So we're currently uh covering season 1. For those who are not familiar with our podcast, we started it in 2020 during the pandemic and then took a very long 3-year hiatus and came back last year. And so we're still covering season 1, working our way toward the end of that. And we keep saying that a lot of the episodes in the latter half of season 1 are really strong, and they get into this really good rhythm that continues through seasons 2 and 3. I think, some of the obvious answers like Band Geeks, of
Mhm.
course, is probably the most famous episode of the show, one of the more critically acclaimed episodes of the show, quoted episodes. I love Rock Bottom. I think that's great. It's just very well written um, exploration of SpongeBob's sort of vulnerability and how he interacts with characters outside of Bikini Bottom. The Christmas Who episode is
Yeah.
such a special thing to me. It really is. Like, I watch it every year still to this day. Um, it warms my heart, and it's like one of the. I feel like in the same way, it's like that, like The Grinch or Charlie Brown or a lot of the classic holiday specials resonated with people over the generations. It is something that, like, in 30 years, people will still be watching Christmas Who as if it's like a classic holiday special from the 1960s. So those are a few of mine, but I have so many I could list.
Yeah, that's a really tough question. Rock Bottom was the one that jumped out as soon as you asked that question to me as well. It's so creative, and yeah, it kind of builds on the world a lot.
Mhm.
You don't go outside of Bikini Bottom much. I think we talked about one recently in an episode where it's just kind of an offhand remark that another city is called something Bottom, and then you go to Rock
Ukulele
Bottom,
Bottom.
and yeah, and it's just like there's so many little glimpses into like other parts of the sea that they don't really ever fully explore until, well, I don't know if until, because we haven't gotten to that point. I don't remember the order specifically. But that one does such a great job of like how, excuse me, how different all, the rest of the world is. It's not just all, like Bikini Bottom.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess if we're going over season one episodes, my favorites are, I mean, Rock Bottom is a great episode. I really do enjoy it because of not only exploring more of what Bikini Bottom has to offer, but also just the strangeness of what Rock Bottom is, where it's just all the way in the bottom, it's dark and it's strange, and you're in a moment in which like SpongeBob is trying to get out, but he just can't, and he tries to do everything he can to, and it just becomes stranger and stranger at every turn. Favorite episode of season one for me is pizza delivery. I really do enjoy when SpongeBob is like very enthusiastic about delivering a pizza, and Squidward is just so fed up. He's just like wants to be done with everything. I think that's pretty relatable, to be quite honest. It's like, I am familiar with people who are just so eager to do everything just so that they can be able to either make the customers happy or their bosses happy. And then you have that one other person who just wants to do the bare minimum so they can get a check.
Right.
Yeah, that's also a really great one. An episode that doesn't air very often, but I can understand that because it's paired up with the Valentine's Day episode is The Paper. I really enjoyed The Paper because it's very minimalistic, but at the same time, you do a lot of gags with just a simple piece of paper. I think it just works really, really brilliantly. And then there's also, um, there's Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, which are also a highlight. I mean, they're just great at every chance that you get to see them. They're essentially like, okay, what if you took like the 1960s Batman TV series, mix it with Aquaman with a bunch of old guys, and then poof, you have a series of episodes focusing on these old heroes who have long since retired, and SpongeBob and Patrick want to be able to go on adventures with them. So, yeah, any episodes like around from the second season onward, there's a ton that I can think of. I mean, Christmas Who's also a really good one. I do enjoy that. I also really enjoy let's see, the Band Geeks one is actually a really interesting story. Now, I'm sure that eventually when you talk about this on your podcast, I really like to know from your perspective because I'm going to talk about it in a future video, but did you know that back in 2007, SpongeBob was rated number one in the top 100 greatest Nicktoon moments of all time? Do you think that that still stands today, considering of all the other Nicktoons that we had since then?
I think that moment has become even more so than when it originally aired, has become, it has almost eclipsed SpongeBob, certainly eclipsed
Yeah.
other moments. And it's like how, the Sopranos finale and that like dip to black at the end has sort of become the reference to the Sopranos. Um, the reference to SpongeBob has almost in many ways become that sweet victory moment.
Yeah.
There was the moment a few years ago at the Super Bowl that
That
was
was this
sort
year.
of, was that this year?
Yeah, yeah, that was just in February. I was going to bring that up. Yeah, the Super Bowl started its broadcast on Nickelodeon with the Sweet Victory.
Oh, I meant like the tribute they did after Steven Hillenberg's death during the
Oh, 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 oh,
was
oh.
it the Travis Scott, I forget who did halftime that year, but where they had it was like a 2 second moment during the
Gotcha,
halftime
gotcha.
show where SpongeBob sort of introduced, because there had been like a whole online campaign to have a tribute to Steven Hillenberg after his passing. But yeah, you're right. This year, um, with the which I also you and I privately talked about this a little bit, but the greatness of the Nickelodeon NFL simulcasts
Yeah,
and their Super Bowl broadcast
yeah.
um was an amazing thing that they did this year. Just to shout that out for a second. Um I I forgot the
I
question.
mean, I think there's some other moments in which that was highlighted. There was like what was it, like an NHL game that also brought in a SpongeBob performance where they did that song, and then there was also various other, like, I think college sports teams that also like
Mm.
performed the song as well. So yeah, I guess you're right, in which like many college sports or major league sports games have been able to showcase this song. And I guess you're right. I mean, it has featured a lot more into our pop culture now than it did almost 20 years ago. One more episode I want to point out right before we continue on is that there was a time in which when Chocolate with Nuts aired, I actually knew a friend who actually decided to pull off that excuse of the scheming salesman to sell his candy for his school. So he and his younger brother were teaming up to sell the most candy out of their school teams. And so they decided to wrap the younger brother in bandages and went door to door to every person and said, please, sir, I'm raising money so that I can help my brother out. Every day he wakes up with broken bones and paper skin. He breaks his legs, he breaks his arms, and he has moments where or his heart attacks put him to sleep. And I have to let you know, this is a small town in Idaho, so they don't watch TV. So they fell for it, and they won by a long slide. They sold the most
Wow.
candy out of their entire school group.
You talk
It
about a
is
moment that transcends the show, though. I mean, outside of the main cast, that's probably the most Halloween costumes I see from the show every year is from that episode. Either the guy with the fake broken bones, or the sweet chocolate, the worm fish
Mm.
that's in the wheelchair, and her daughter. Yeah, that those are hits every year.
And the most frequently quoted moment that's
Yeah.
not a main character, other than, my leg, maybe.
Yeah.
But for a
Yeah.
one-time character that chocolate,
Right.
that, I mean, how many times have you heard that?
too many. Too many is the answer. Yeah, especially with you can be able to take any particular quote out of context and it'll be just funny. It's like if somebody were to say, "Oh, I remember when they first invented chocolate. I've always hated it." Or, "Oh, I got it. Let's get naked." No, let's use that when we sell real estate or something like that. So, yeah, you could take any particular quote and just take it out of context and it'll be just like people will be looking at you, they'll be confused and then they'll think of it and then they'll laugh. I really do enjoy what it's able to do when people just randomly say a particular quote or do something SpongeBob related, especially if they don't know it. And it just either confuses them or they just laugh the heck out of each other. It's awesome. Yeah, so a thing that I really do enjoy about the show, especially when it first came out, was that I've noticed in recent years that a lot of newer shows, they tend to be a little bit slow at the beginning, and then later on in the second season, that's when it really starts getting good. And the reason why is, obviously because, the writers are still trying to tweak a few things, or maybe it's due to corporate mandate that they're holding them back from wanting to start releasing some really good ideas just so they can be able to test them to see if it'll work, or maybe due to like various limitations. But, in SpongeBob's case, like from the moment that the first episode aired, it was already like a major hit. Like it knocked it out of the park of like, oh yeah, this is going to be something really special.
100%. It seemed, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, how even from, I think, the second episode, uh, having Bubble Stand
Mhm.
in it as the second episode, that is a classic moment.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's also the episode with Ripped Pants, the Ripped Pants segment, if I'm not mistaken. And I mean, those are two heavy hitters in the first early in the first season, and it's a pattern that we see continue throughout the first season where the writing is so strong for a children's show about undersea life, and they get so much mileage out of these characters. And I think part of it is the characters are so strongly written. Patricia, you were talking about Sandy and her contributions to the show. I think having a character like Sandy and then having somebody like Patrick and being able to have those characters to not only give individual storylines to, but pair them up. Um, there are just so many amazing moments that can be produced by writing strong characters like that and trusting an audience, especially an audience of kids,
Hmm.
um, with that sort of material.
I do agree. Yeah. I think that the reason why that SpongeBob worked, especially since there were other Nicktoons at the time that kind of followed in that same humor. Ren and Stimpy, Rocko's Modern Life, Cat Dog, Angry Beavers. Like, what made SpongeBob work? And I mean, yeah, Ren and Stimpy did in a way work. And so did Rocko's Modern Life and Cat Dog and Angry Beavers. They did work. But what was it that made SpongeBob the phenomenon it is? I think the reason why it was is because not only did the jokes work, and not only did the setting give an opportunity for expansive places for people to for the characters to explore, and for a lot of set pieces to be included in there, especially since they're underwater. I mean, it's much more vast than, say, like um, a town or a city or something like that. I think that, with underwater being like millions upon millions of miles away, and with, an open ocean meeting up with a whole bunch of creatures, a lot of things can play around with. And very similar to, like, say, those earlier shows, they do a lot of jokes that can be able to work for both kids and adults, but do it in a way that kind of like balances it out. It's not like completely gross, like, say, a Ren and Stimpy or a Rocco, but it's not like completely off the radar with their ad-libbing, or very sophisticated like Angry Beavers. So I think it meets up with that perfect balance of, like, yeah, I think that a general audience will probably get into it as opposed to like a niche audience. I think that there was an interesting quote where I heard about, like, okay, well, there's going to be some people out there that will drink wine and it's very sophisticated, but the general audience is going to drink water. Whether they're going to lean more towards wine or water. Well, water is the thing that people are going to be leaning more towards. And you know what? Maybe some of the other shows were like wine, catering to a specific crowd. SpongeBob being the water you basically like caters to everybody.
Yeah, and something else that I think makes SpongeBob so successful compared to some of those other shows that you elicited, or why it became such a major phenomenon, is any show with a ensemble cast, a sitcom or a drama, whatever it is, you have to kind of build out the characters enough that you understand like the relationship between each of the characters to each other. So there are jokes between Sandy and Squidward that are hilarious because they're so well developed, and you see those characters interact early on, that by the end of season 1, you understand, like, the relationship between those two characters and why that joke lands. And I think, kids don't think about it that way, but they're exposed to it so much that it's like, any interaction between any of the characters is funny. It's not like, oh, well, we're 3 seasons in and we're finally having an episode of Mr. Krabs with, I don't know, Patrick. Like, no, from the beginning, we know that Mr. Krabs thinks Patrick is an idiot and he's going to try to take advantage of him for, his stupidity to get rich. So we see that over and over again, and it just builds on it season after season.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you made because, again, going back to those previous shows, I mean, you have essentially like a small cast of people just interacting with each other. I mean, Ren and Stimpy basically just interact with one another. I mean, sure, they go in through some moments with each other, but they're usually one-off characters, or they're characters that play other roles, like a Looney Tunes show. You're going to have Kowalski coming in. You're going to have Mr. Horse coming in. You're going to have George Liquor American coming in, but they're not the same character every single time. Or you have something like, Rocco, Heifer, and Filbert. I mean, you have the 3, but sometimes maybe Filbert doesn't show up in an episode and Heifer does. Or Filbert will show up in an episode, but Heifer doesn't. Or Rocco's by himself. Or, we have the Chameleon Brothers. We have Mr. and Mrs. Bighead. We see the characters every once in a while, but the purpose of the show is Rocco trying to live off his life as a young adult moving from Australia to America, and just trying to deal with the fact that he's an adult living on his own, surrounded by a whole bunch of craziness. And then you have, again, the Angry Beavers, very similar to Ren and Stimpy, in which, like, for the most part, it's mostly about them. You do get other characters from time to time, but you have Norbert and Treeflower, but you would have Daggett and Treeflower, but they don't have the same chemistry. Maybe you'll have Norbert and you'll have Stump, but then you won't have Daggett and Stump have the same reaction toward one another. Or maybe Barry, or you would have Truckee, or something of the sort. Like they are a cast together, but they don't have the same interaction, and they're not around for very often. And with Cat Dog, again, you do have several characters. You have Mervis and Dunglap, you have Rancid Rabbit, you have the Greasers, you have Winslow, but again, it's not really much of a chemistry towards everybody. I mean, for the most part, everybody pretty much hates Cat Dog, except for Dog. But yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point that you made is that you have a whole ensemble and you can play around with every single one of them. You have some episodes with SpongeBob and Patrick, and then you have some episodes with Patrick and Squidward, or SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs, or Mr. Krabs and Plankton, or Plankton and SpongeBob, or you can be able to mix it up and it would deliver something really interesting. And I think you can have that versatility where all the characters are really well developed, and in any situation you could put them in because they all have distinct personalities that would either match really well or be a clash with each other that would be really well. So, yeah, I think you really brought up an interesting point, Tyler.
Speaking about Rocko's Modern Life, especially with there being such a lineage from the staff of that show, like with Mr. Lawrence, with Steven Hillenberg. There were people from Rocko's Modern Life who then went to work on SpongeBob. A lot of the reason that SpongeBob was sort of able to become such a massive success using at times similar humor or having a similar sensibility to those shows was because it wasn't so abrasive. I know that there were a lot of parents in the 90s who had a problem with their kids watching Ren and Stimpy or Rocko's Modern Life because of the amount of innuendo and content on that show that they deemed inappropriate. And
I mean,
feel
it
like,
is true because there was a
yeah.
doctor in Rocco that was called Dr. Bendova.
Right. Right, like Chokey's Chicken, all this. I mean, them, actually saying like hell on Ren and
Mhm.
Stimpy and stuff. So there is I think there was sort of a covert sensibility to SpongeBob where like a lot of there are a lot of jokes for adults on SpongeBob, but the writing is, I don't want to say more clever, but it's a different type, a different style of joke writing and storytelling, and it wasn't so abrasive. So I think there were adults that were able to get the jokes, and obviously I think the most blatant they get on the show is Sailor Mouth in
Mhm.
season 2 and my dad always talks about how he loved, like he would be, in the room with me as a kid when that episode came on and he would like sit down and watch it because he thought it was funny. And so, they do have moments where they appeal to sort of a more blue, if you will, style of humor. But I think a lot of the time it's way less in your face than something like Rocko's Modern Life was. And so I think that helped it sort of appeal to a much broader audience because people, even though there are a lot of people I know still who were not allowed to watch SpongeBob
Yeah.
as a kid, their parents still wouldn't let them watch it.
Yeah, I remember there was an article on NPR that was stating that watching copious amounts of SpongeBob actually made kids a little bit dumber, or it had major repercussions on their short attention span. So that's why SpongeBob had gotten a bad rap for a couple of years because apparently it was bad for you to watch a lot of SpongeBob. So that was why there was probably some cases in which parents forbade their children from watching SpongeBob, which, if that's the case, if you want to be able to protect your child, I can completely understand in that aspect. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are a lot of like jokes that are not appropriate for kids. Again, I can completely understand that, but trust me, there are a lot worse things that you can put your child onto the TV than SpongeBob.
Oh yeah,
Especially
way
now.
worse. Speaking about this series, so we are, one of the things about our show is that we do not have plans to talk about the entire series chronologically. We are focusing on the first 3 seasons and the first movie, what many fans deem to be sort of the golden years or the classic years. But I do want to say it's very interesting, and I was thinking about this the other day, that even though we're honing in on those first 3 seasons and the first movie, there is I spent a lot of time watching, I would say maybe seasons 4 through 7 or through 8. Like those, I was a young kid still in elementary school, maybe like early middle school when those seasons were airing. So I still am so familiar with a lot of that era of SpongeBob, which I feel like is a lot of people's experience, people of who are Tyler's and my age. So it's very interesting to uh to think about how regardless, like those earlier seasons have been have been deemed to be of such a higher quality by many people. And I think it does really speak to the what makes early SpongeBob so incredibly special. The writing, the voice acting, the scenarios, and really Steven Hillenberg's vision as a showrunner for that show and his sort of I've used the word sensibility like 50 times already, but his vision, his sensibility for what that show was so clear and so evident in those initial seasons and in the movie.
Yeah, so I guess with the show out of the way, now we can go over to the first SpongeBob movie, which aired in 2004. So I think one of the things that I really did enjoy about the movie was the fact that they were able to have a little adventure story, which I that's one of the things that I really did enjoy about some of the SpongeBob episodes, where they were able to go beyond what Bikini Bottom had to offer, and they were able to explore other places than just Bikini Bottom and at the time Rock Bottom. They were able to go to Shell City. They went up to the surface. Yeah, so I remember when I first saw the movie in theaters, I think, or did I watch it on like no, I think I did watch it on I think I did see the movie in theaters, and I remember the tagline of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, where it was like hero, legend, sponge. And I'm like, this looks really familiar because it's actually almost the same tagline as Big Top Pee-wee's tagline on his poster, which says hero, lover, legend. And there was like a little bit of a mixture of like Pee-wee's Big Adventure when I was watching the movie for the first time. It's like, okay, something gets stolen, they have to go out of their comfort zone so they can be able to retrieve it. They go into a biker bar. There's a dance involved, and they meet up with a whole bunch of crazy celebrity cameos. And then there's this huge rock and roll number. So, yeah, I was like noticing little bits and pieces of it here and there. But when I realized that Steven Hillenberg was kind of a little inspired of Pee-wee when he was creating SpongeBob with a mixture of Jerry Lewis, I was like, oh, yeah, that I guess that does make a lot of sense. And I really do enjoy a lot of the jokes that are in this movie. I really like the music that was featured in this movie. It's actually funny because one of the songs from the SpongeBob SquarePants soundtrack that was never played in the movie actually was featured on the BBC's top 50 greatest songs that were featured in theatrical or TV. No, it was theatrical animated films alongside with some of the Disney classics. And I'm like, wow, that a SpongeBob song. That's like one of the very few non-Disney songs that made it into the list. That just goes to show you the power of SpongeBob. Alongside
Right.
with Let It Go and You Got a Friend in Me and various other songs that you would expect from Disney. And I think that probably one of the top I think the top song on the BBC list was You Got a Friend in Me. And I think that some of the other ones that were on the top was like Circle of Life. And there was also We Don't Talk About Bruno when that song took over when Encanto first came out. And let's see what Let It Go was obviously like in the top 10. But yeah, if and for those who are wondering what song is it, it's not Ocean Man, sad to say. It's actually They'll Soon Discover by the Shins, which again is not a song that is played in the movie. It's actually in one of the soundtracks. But again, it's actually one of 10 songs that is not from a Disney movie featured on the BBC's top 50 greatest animated movie songs of all time. Anyway,
That
but
is unexpected. I would
yeah, it
not
is
have
unexpected.
in a million years.
I didn't expect it either, but there you go. It's a stupid fact that I decided to bring up for the reasons I have no idea about. Anyway, but yeah, out of the three movies that Aaron and I saw together, we still think that the first one is still the best. I know that at the time, but when we were doing the Versus series on both SpongeBob movies, that was like Sponge Out of Water versus the original SpongeBob, I heard a lot from a lot of people saying, "Oh, the second one is actually better." But when I saw both of them back to back, we were like, no, what are they talking
Right.
about? The first movie's clearly better. And this is from somebody who didn't exactly grow up with SpongeBob. These are just two people who decided to just watch these movies. And we were like, yeah, I mean, it's clearly that the first movie, even though it's more simple of its story, is a lot more tighter in its presentation.
Yes. So confession, I have seen obviously the first movie. I saw the first movie in theaters. It's funny, the other day I was going through like some stuff in my basement and I found the at the time Burger King, the toy when the or like the theme of the toys when the movie premiered was SpongeBob. And so I have my SpongeBob like little digital watch um from when I was a kid. So I
I
have to see if
also
I can
have
find a
that.
bit. Are you
I
serious?
just want to say yes.
One of my proudest possessions.
That's awesome.
But saw that movie in theaters, loved it. Obviously, I was obsessed with it. You're correct. It is the best one. Um, and I have seen the second movie. I have not seen the third one.
Okay.
Actually, no, I've seen, I think, 10 minutes of the third one.
Oh, okay. So you did
Um,
see Sponge on the Run.
yes. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, don't worry, you're not really missing out on it too much.
Or Sponge Out of Water, I saw.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Sponge on the Run is there's a fourth one in the works, right?
Yeah, there is a fourth one in the works where, well, I guess it depends on which fourth one you're talking about. Are you talking about the Sandy Cheeks movie, or are you talking about the SpongeBob versus the Flying Dutchman?
I think there's like one that's coming out in 2025
And that's
that's like
probably the Flying Dutchman one, yeah.
okay. It's like
That
SpongeBob Search for, or is it just called Search for SpongeBob or something?
I think it's
I think.
probably, yeah, something like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
I do know that the Sandy Cheeks movie's coming out this year on Netflix, and then the theatrical one is coming out next year. You're right.
Yeah, so I don't my relationship with the second and third movies is not as strong. I do remember liking the second one, Sponge Out of Water, and it's a different animation style
Mm-hmm.
too, which I think also may have and at that time I think I was in high school, a junior or senior in high school, and so I was not keeping up with the series, um, its new episodes.
Mhm.
So, and I do remember, I think Tyler and I, who were friends in high school, talking about when the second movie was coming out, and maybe even discussing possibly going to see it, which never came to fruition, or just talking about it in general. But I do think for it is a good movie. I cannot believe anybody would say that it eclipses the original.
Hmm. I guess to each his own.
True.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything's subjective. But it is I think the original is such a I mean in a way it was going to be the series finale
Yeah.
for
Right.
the series before there was a green light for season 4 and it feels that way. It feels like such a perfect cap to that story and it's such an earnest story. It's a well-told story. It's heartwarming, it's funny, it's endearing. I think there are moments of it to a kid where the stakes seem incredibly high, even though it's this very silly story. So yeah, I have such fond memories of that movie, and I think it does hold up a lot.
I mean, I still quote lines from that movie a lot.
Yeah. I always have this theory of why they decided to continue on with SpongeBob at that time. When the movie came out in 2004, I mean, Nickelodeon pretty much had nothing. I mean, they ended their partnership with Klasky Csupo at that point because Rugrats, Rocket Power, As Told by Ginger, they all
Hmm.
ended at that same year in 2004. And it was just at the last trinklets of life that Snick had right before it ended in 2005. And yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of like Nicktoons that were like keeping it afloat. I mean, sure, we had like other shows. I mean, we had My Life as a Teenage Robot, we had Fairly Odd Parents, we had Danny Phantom, but um it was not until SpongeBob in which like, people knew about it. It became a huge phenomenon and they didn't want to let that cash cow go. And now we're still seeing more episodes of it. We're still seeing more movies of it. And yeah, unfortunately, for some people it's a double-edged sword. It's like, SpongeBob has just been such a high standard that a lot of other Nicktoons can't really compete with it. It's like if it doesn't meet up to the SpongeBob standard, your show is pretty much canceled in like 1 or 2 seasons. The Loud House is one of the very few exceptions that I've seen that happen in the past decade, where shows
Right.
like Middlemost Post, It's Pony, Harvey Beaks, various other programs have just like up and died at like their second season. But again, it's not necessarily SpongeBob's fault that it has such a high standard that a lot of people are trying to get into. It's just a matter of like, you know, Nickelodeon is just trying to capture lightning in a bottle like multiple times, and they just never been able to succeed at it. I think that they need to like simmer down on it. I mean, they're following like Capcom or Konami or even Square Enix logic, and it's like, oh yeah, 4 million copies of a video game is considered a failure. It's like, no, it's not.
You're totally right. That was a very interesting time for Nickelodeon because I feel like all those Nicktoons you mentioned were coming to an end. This is like moments before Avatar: The Last Airbender
Mhm.
premiered, which is obviously, sort of a different entity, but a different like type of show, a different sort of theme, but like became a huge success in its own right. And I think 2004 is the year that Drake and Josh premiered, like
Yes.
iCarly hadn't premiered. So there wasn't sort of this renaissance of live action Nickelodeon sitcoms to come save them either.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
mean, like for 2004, like before Drake and Josh premiered, I mean, yes, it's true that we had the Amanda Show, but I mean, for the most part, you had like other sitcoms that didn't really catch on, like No One Knows Best, Caitlin's Way, Taina, Brothers Garcia, like
Romeo.
Romeo.
Oh wow. Forgot
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, which was pretty much the last program created by Thomas W. Lynch right before he just went and did other things that was not creating shows. But yeah, there were a live action series didn't exactly catch on, even though they tried to do it with Teen Nick. I mean, it wasn't until like Dan Schneider came along and did like the series of various programs like Drake and Josh and iCarly, Zoe 101, and Victorious and Henry Danger, the Thundermans, Game Shakers, like, those programs that just like blew up the entire world, and other programs on Nickelodeon that tried to catch in on the popularity of it. It wasn't exactly a time where I guess in a way Nickelodeon couldn't exactly let go of SpongeBob right away, but I think that maybe they did wanted to at some point, but I think they were just too far ahead that they could just risk it because I guess there was nothing on that really caught on compared to to compare to SpongeBob.
Yeah, and I mean, even when I mean, this is anecdotal, but I've gone back and especially since we've been doing the podcast and watched, and because a lot of these shows are now so readily available to stream, I've gone back and watched some of the contempt of SpongeBob's contemporaries from that time, as far as Nicktoons are concerned. Even with like the Fairly Odd Parents, which I grew up loving, Jimmy Neutron, Danny Phantom, and a lot of those like SpongeBob was doing some heavy lifting when it came
Yeah.
to carrying Nicktoons as a brand in the early aughts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and talk about like, you know, shows that uh people weren't allowed to watch, like just because they were mindless. I mean, that is how I would qualify most of the other like Nickelodeon cartoons. Again, I loved them as a kid. I loved Fairly Odd Parents and Jimmy Neutron and stuff, but like SpongeBob is so witty, and like, you could learn about like script writing from watching SpongeBob. The other shows, I don't know if they have as much to offer, you know, either culturally or just like for a child to watch, as SpongeBob did.
Yeah, I
Right. Like
mean, with the exception of maybe As Told by Ginger, all of the other shows were
mm,
leaning more towards comedy. Like, okay, Fairly Odd Parents comedy. I guess Chalk Zone and My Life as a Teenage Robot had their different flavors. Like, Chalk Zone was a little bit more creative with its drawing and with its music. My Life as a Teenage Robot and Danny Phantom were more into action. But yeah, Jimmy Neutron comedy, Fairly Odd Parents comedy. Yeah, there were a lot of more comedic shows that were like influenced by SpongeBob in some way, shape, or form. Even like the non-Nickelodeon shows were kind of like influenced by SpongeBob. Like in Kids WB, there was like Coconut Fred's Fruit Island Salad Adventure or something like that. And there were a lot of other shows that were like saying, yeah, all the people that were formerly working on SpongeBob, let's see if we can kind of like give you an opportunity to do like a SpongeBob-esque TV show, like when Joe Murray was doing Camp Lazlo on Cartoon Network. And it's like, yeah, let's see if we can bring back some of the former people who worked on both Rocco and SpongeBob to kind of do something similar. So yeah, you can definitely feel that SpongeBob aura coming into a lot of the non-Nickelodeon programs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like it was a very interesting time. I mean, especially since, with SpongeBob being like the standard of how to create a comedy series, kind of like how at the time you have The Simpsons, which was able to bring about more adult sitcoms, or Ren and Stimpy, which was able to bring back the success of more comedic gross out humor, or with Batman the Animated Series bringing a new standard on superhero animated series. So SpongeBob was essentially like the standard of like wacky, crazy kid shows that has a lot of characters and a lot of humor, but not necessarily understanding on what made it successful in the first place.
And that usually is the case when it comes to television executives wanting to replicate the success of something, but not having the creativity of the writers
Mhm.
to understand what made it successful in the first place.
Yeah, I think that today's audiences, I think it's like, I guess an equivalent would be like Spider-Verse or like the Super Mario Brothers movie or Barbie. It's like, yeah, what made those successful? It's like, oh, just adapt a video game into a TV series or movie, or adapt a
Right.
toy into a video game series or movie. I guess the Lego movie would kind of like be an example of that too. So it's like, oh, the clever writing, the good characters, the great songs is like, no, 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 no. We just want the essence of toys and doing something animated, and poof, there you go. We have $1 billion.
Right. Like it's a formula that you can
Yeah.
just plug in and get the same results. And
And that's why
before,
people are. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, and that's why people are getting tired of Marvel movies, just because it's like the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, again, my husband Aaron and I were even talking about that in our podcast series, Aaron and Patricia, where we were like looking into the same argument from people. It's like saying, Marvel movies are essentially out and video game adaptations are in, because the Super Mario
Mhm.
Brothers movie made over $1 billion. The Last of Us TV series was a huge success,
Yep.
and currently, right now, so is like the Castlevania series on Netflix, and Nocturne, and then
Oh
there's the
wow, yeah.
Fallout TV series as well. So it's like, yeah, more people are adapting video games as opposed to superhero movies because the formula has already been dried out. So yeah, that seems to what I've noticed is like, whether it be with Rugrats, where it's like, oh, we have like these little baby adventures, let's see if we can do the same thing. It's like, okay, let's have mega babies. If you don't know what it is, good. Or oh, we have SpongeBob. Oh, let's have Coconut Fred and all these other programs. Or oh, we have the Lego movie. Oh, no, we have the Playmobil movie. It's like, okay, yeah, we're seeing this, and we're gonna continue seeing this, in which is like one thing pops along, and then they try to ride on the coattails until eventually, like 10 or 15 years later, it just gets really worn out, and then they look for the next thing to milk dry.
It's truly a tale as old as television,
As
honestly,
media,
from
yeah.
like, yeah, as me, like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie, and like like when Living Single and Friends became huge things in the 90s, every show was suddenly about five or six people living in New
Yep.
York.
Yeah.
Um, you know.
Every teen movie was a vampire movie for about 10 years.
Yeah, with the popularity of Twilight, or oh, we have to have a dystopian world. Okay, we have Hunger Games, we have Divergent,
Yep.
or okay, we're now gonna have fantasy. Okay, we're gonna have Lord of the Rings, we're gonna have Harry Potter, we're gonna have a series of unfortunate events. So we're gonna have Chronicles of Narnia, we're gonna have Bridge of Terabithia. It's a lot. It's a lot. But anyway, what we're trying to get at is that again, for people who are blaming SpongeBob for the quote unquote downfall of Nickelodeon, don't. it's the executives who are putting the idea of that SpongeBob is the one that makes a whole bunch of money, even though that it's just doing its own thing. I mean, it's just trying its very best to stay afloat. And yeah, I mean, whether that you like the later episodes or not, or whether that you want it to die, I mean, at the end of the day, kids are still watching it, kids are enjoying it. And I mean, unless of course, if there's a moment in which like nobody is watching Nickelodeon anymore for some reason, which recently I just read the announcement that the Disney Channel is now more popular to watch on television for kids than Nickelodeon, which is
Wow.
crazy to me. But yeah, it's not going away anytime soon. And I can think of a couple of examples where SpongeBob has become such a huge impact on their childhood. So, I have to tell this story. So, I was in Florida SuperCon several years ago, waiting in line to meet up with Roger Bumpus. And there was a guy right in front of me who was dressed as the scout from Team Fortress 2. And he had a SpongeBob DVD in his hand. And he approached him almost at the verge of tears. He was like maybe no older than 16 years old. And he said, I have to tell you something. When I was a kid, I would rush home every day after school to watch SpongeBob, and I lived in multiple foster homes. And SpongeBob was the one that really got me excited to go home and, tune into watching it with my foster brothers and sisters and my friends. And Roger was really, really touched by that as he was signing his DVD. So I just thought to myself, wow, I mean, I'm surrounded by a bunch of teenagers and adults who essentially grew up with this show. And I met up with Roger like around, this must have been like around 2014 or 15. So yeah, I mean, the show had already been on the air for over a decade at that point. So the fact that I was seeing a whole bunch of teenagers and young kids going over to meet up with Roger, I mean, I mean, SpongeBob was essentially their childhood. Like it was there for them all the time. I never experienced something like that for SpongeBob because I was already 13 when the show premiered, but I can tell you several stories about like shows that have always been around with me that mean a lot to me. But with something like SpongeBob, I mean, it's definitely something that I was at the point where I was saying, you know what? As much as I hear the internet complaining over and over again that they just want SpongeBob to end, I cannot deny the fact that there are still people out there who still love it, and I don't want to take that away from them.
Which
Yeah.
is, yeah, I mean, you got to let people have things. And I can relate to having a SpongeBob obsession. Well, obviously, we have a podcast about, but as a young kid, I mean, that show shaped a lot of my world, shaped a lot of my sense of humor, and I was constantly watching it. When I was a kid, my parents made put me in like pee-wee football. I played every sport and I was terrible at all of them. But this was the first time they put me in one. And I remember something was going on with I started seeing promos on Nickelodeon about how whatever the programming block was that aired like 2 episodes of SpongeBob and then 2 episodes of Fairly Odd Parents every day, they were swapping them. So I think SpongeBob was going to come on first or later, whatever the change was. I wasn't going to be able to see SpongeBob because I would be at football practice. And so I told my parents I didn't want to play football anymore because I wasn't going to be able to watch SpongeBob. And they said, I like cried and cried about it. And they told me that I could quit, but I had to be the one to tell my coach why I wanted to quit. And I did it. And I got to watch SpongeBob.
Wow. At the end of the day, was it worth it?
I would say so.
All
Because you know
right.
what? But although who knows, maybe instead of hosting a SpongeBob podcast, I'd have a career in the NFL.
And
But who's to
CTE.
say?
So I mean, it
Oh,
balances
who
out.
knows?
Who knows? Who's to say, really?
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, I just have a few other things I like to talk about with SpongeBob before we wrap things up. So, have any of you guys seen the SpongeBob musical?
No,
I've no,
unfortunately.
I've seen clips and listened to
Yeah.
the soundtrack, but I've not seen it in
Okay, well,
person.
all right. Well, I don't want to spoil it for those who have not seen it, but it's essentially that Plankton has another major plan to steal the Krabby Patty formula, and along the way, there's this huge volcano that's about to explode, and pretty much like take the bikini bottom down, and it's up to SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy to save the day. So again, I don't want to get into major spoilers for those who haven't seen it, but I'll just let you know this. It is really, really good. The casting is excellent. Music's really well done, written by a whole bunch of singers and musicians. There's a lot of really great callbacks to the original series. A lot of great songs that were from the original series are in there too. So I would highly recommend for those who have not seen the musical to check it out. And I take it that you probably haven't seen Camp Coral or the Patrick Star Show either, because I have not. I have no interest in watching it.
I've seen bits and pieces of it, just like when my nephew was watching it occasionally. But nothing ever like jumped out at me as like, oh, that was really funny or anything like that.
I've not seen any of Camp Coral. I think I've seen one, not even a full episode, but I started watching the Patrick Star Show, and yeah, I was not impressed. But
Okay. Again, Aaron and I are still at a bet. Is it going to end on the second or third season? So we're still waiting on that. But yeah, I guess one more thing I want to talk about is the music. So yeah, I guess kind of like similar to like the previous Nicktoons, that they're also well known for their music. I mean, they even used to release like CD soundtracks of their songs, like Doug,
Yeah.
Rugrats, Ren and
mhm.
Stimpy, various other particular shows that used to release like major soundtracks. I own the Hey Arnold vinyl record and the Adventures of
Wow.
Pete and Pete vinyl
Ooh.
record. Oh, by the
Ah,
way, trying to get a hold of that Hey Arnold record was brutal. I had to go through at least three reprints in order for me to buy a copy of the vinyl record. And I just got like the plain boring one, but I don't care because I own one. But
right.
yeah, it's fantastic. It is volume one, so I can't wait for volume two whenever that comes out. But yeah, they have a lot of vinyl records now with like there's an Avatar The Last Airbender one, there's a Ren and Stimpy one, there's a Doug one, but yeah, SpongeBob is just as well known for its music as it is for its like its characters and its episodes, et cetera, et cetera. Like, Best Day Ever, then there's various other songs that are played in the series that are very memorable for a lot of people. So yeah, I would say that I think that's another reason why SpongeBob has stood the test of time is its music. Like, music is one of my favorite things in TV shows and movies as well. So with SpongeBob, it's no exception.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, from the first episode, the use of Tiny Tim
Oh
in Help
God.
Wanted
Yeah.
sort of set the tone for what was going to be going on with the music. And even you're right, even transition music. I mean, the theme song itself is iconic.
hmm
And not
There's
just humor. I mean, the stove is a stove is probably my favorite song
mm,
from the series. And I mean that's like a tearjerker.
it is.
It is
And
actually,
it's played
yeah.
so sincerely.
Right.
hmm
And I think that's what works about a lot of the musical performances, if you will, on the show, like these original songs that are sung by characters. They treat the songwriters and musicians are crafting these songs and making them meaningful songs with good lyrics, and they're not phoned in for a lot of the songs we've mentioned. So I think that's what helps really make it special. Like you can tell with a lot of kids shows when the writing is half-hearted, or if it's like a musical related thing, if the songwriting itself, if they just threw you know a drum beat and plugged some lyrics in and called it a day. But like the musicianship actually shines through in a lot of these songs, and a lot of them are earworms. Like they really
Mhm.
stick with you.
And when they pick a song to cover, they pick like, you know, a great one, like, Sweet Victory or the song from the movie that they parody that is escaping me. The name of the actual song is escaping
I
me.
Want to Rock.
I
Yeah, I
Want to
want to
Rock.
rock.
Yes. Yeah, like those are like hard hitting like dad rock anthems
Right.
that you would not expect in a cartoon. But like if they weren't taking it so seriously, like they would have not picked those songs, but it works.
And also the use of Ocean Man at the end of the first movie is so perfect. That song, like the first time I ever watched that in theaters, and SpongeBob jumps in the air and hits
Yeah.
that freeze frame, and you hear the first notes of that song. That's brilliant. That's a
Yep.
brilliant song.
Yeah. So, do you have any final words right before we conclude the podcast?
Happy 25th anniversary to SpongeBob SquarePants. Obviously, it has been an influential force in my life. I think it's just there's such a proud legacy of this show for obviously the people who were involved in the making of it, but for people who are SpongeBob fans, I think it's just one of those cultural touchstones for so many people that brings them together. You can quote something from it and a lot of people will automatically get it. It's just one of those things that like has truly, this sounds very like silly, but it really has made the world a better place in many respects. Like it is has been such a cultural phenomenon. And so I'm very happy that we get to continue talking about that we've gotten to talk about it here thanks to your invitation and that we get to continue speaking about it on our podcast.
All right. How about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, it basically, except for, the people that weren't allowed to watch it, as we talked about earlier, it really is like for our generation, like you quote SpongeBob and people from all walks of life are going to be, are going to hear that and immediately you have something to talk about, you have something to relate to that person with,
Mhm.
just because so many people from our generation watched it. It was just the show. There was nothing else that, it's almost like a monoculture for our generation, which there's such so few examples of that nowadays,
Right.
that yeah, it just has touched a lot of people.
Yeah. And as for me, as somebody who did not exactly grow up with SpongeBob, I think that the respect that I have for SpongeBob is undeniable. I do like the show, but I more respect it for what it did.
Mm.
I do respect the fact that it was able to do a lot of great situational comedy moments. I also love the fact that it was able to pull off a lot of jokes that both parents and their children can watch. I like the characters, I like the songs, I like the scenarios that they were able to get themselves into. And overall, I think that another reason why the show has stood the test of time is that there's nothing really about the show that is exactly age. Like, oh, there's no like computers or modern lingo that's going on, or there's not particularly any like song that was like hugely popular at the time that they're referencing. I mean, they have references, but they're references that not a lot of people would get. And also, it's not like more modern references that would be dated in about 10 or 20 years. So, I think that the timeliness of SpongeBob is what makes it more universally appealing to any generation, as opposed to like, okay, there's a show that probably came out like maybe 30 years ago, but yeah, it looks a little bit aged because, they're referencing something that used to be popular at the time, or their, maybe their humor doesn't exactly hit, or something like that. Maybe they were limited with its budget. But no, I think that SpongeBob will still stand the test of time because of everything that you guys mentioned, plus many more things. But yeah, I would say, to quote Thad Komorowski, the writer of the Sick Little Monkeys Ren and Stimpy storybook, was that SpongeBob was probably like the last, animated series that had like a mass appeal for a general audience, whereas all the other shows that came out afterwards were probably a little bit more niche. And if it is like universally appealing, it's more for like an adult or a child audience, like younger children. Like, we wouldn't exactly put like SpongeBob with kids and adults the same way as we would put, say, like Rick and Morty or even Bluey. I mean, sure, like those shows have like huge fan bases, but they're more like leaning towards one side or the other. They're not leaning towards both. I mean, I guess Bluey sort of, but it's geared towards preschoolers, and maybe I guess Rick and Morty at the time when it became popular, but again, it's leaning more towards adults. Whereas SpongeBob, it has that middle ground. It could be for kids, it could be for adults. So,
Right.
um, yeah, I would say that in a way, I guess that is correct. I haven't seen another show that was able to become as successfully appealing to everybody as SpongeBob. But you know what? I mean, at this point, you never know if the next SpongeBob or the next who knows what will come out. But in the meantime, SpongeBob is still standing pretty strong. But yeah, I think that at the end of the day, I know that a lot of people are getting tired of it. I know that SpongeBob is running along a little bit too long for a lot of people, but again, as I mentioned earlier, if people are still watching it, then it's still going to be on. And I did hear some interesting reactions to when the Standy Cheeks movie was out. I haven't seen it because I want to wait until it officially comes out on Netflix. But if it's either good or bad, again, it's not SpongeBob's fault that the quality is the way it is. So again, I would
Right.
say look back on SpongeBob with some of the good aspects of what it was able to bring, because that is the true essence of what the show is. At least that's what Steven Hillenburg hoped to at least bring into it when he first created it. So again, major shout outs to all the people who have worked on SpongeBob, and also rest in peace to Steven Hillenburg.
Absolutely. What a legacy he created with this show.
Absolutely. All right, so that is it for this episode of Casual Chat. So Qadree, Tyler, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. And
Yeah, thanks for having us.
can I just say I listened to a bit of your episode with Will McRobb, and I was so I'm such a huge fan of The Adventures of Pete and Pete and Radio Free Roscoe, which he also co-created. And that was such a great conversation, and it like made me go watch The Adventures of Pete and Pete after I heard it. So I just wanted to compliment you on that.
Oh,
Like
thank you
what
so much.
yeah, of course. That show is brilliant, and I think it's an example of something that is not as, I don't know, known or acclaimed or seen as being like as it's not like an All That or a Keenan and Kel. I feel like it's a much more niche show, but it's truly some of the most brilliant television programming that has ever existed. That show is so funny and smart and heartwarming.
Yes, it is. And I'm glad that you were able to check out Pete and Pete. And I'm hoping that more people do, because it's still an awesome show. I'm still waiting for it to be out on Paramount Plus. Even if you remove the music, I still want to see Pete and Pete on Paramount Plus. But
Right.
or at least like release every episode on DVD. That way we don't have to scrounge out for $100 for season one. But yeah, go watch Pete and Pete if you haven't yet. But yeah, I would like for you guys to plug and promote your stuff.
We are every 11 minutes a SpongeBob SquarePants podcast. You can listen to us everywhere you get your podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts. We release our video versions of our podcast on Spotify, at SpongeBob Pod on most of our social media, except for Instagram, where we are SpongePod SquarePants. And yeah, we just actually released our latest episode talking about season one, episode 14, which is SB129 and Karate Choppers, a great Sandy episode. So please go listen to that.
Awesome. And as for me, you can check out my work at oldschoollane.net. I'm on YouTube, which is youtube.com/oldschoollane, facebook.com/oldschoollane. I'm on Twitter at patty_b_Miranda. I'm on Instagram at old_school_lane. You can check out the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes will go there first, and then they'll go up in a few days on YouTube. This will probably be the last podcast I'm going to be posting for a while, because I'm getting married and I'm not going to have enough time to post a whole bunch of other content. So I hope that you guys enjoy this one. And if you haven't, then go listen to all the podcasts that we've been doing over the past 10 years. Go check out some of the videos that I've done. And yeah, we'll announce when we're going to be coming back to doing podcasts again. So yeah, everyone, that's it for now. Let us know in the comments below about your favorite SpongeBob characters, episodes, moments. What are your thoughts on the movies? What are your thoughts on the Broadway musical? What are your thoughts on any of the SpongeBob spin-off series? So yeah, let us know. That's it. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.